It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akua, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. It's been another big week in Westminster and we've got a Christmas cracker of a show for you this morning. It's been a tough week for Rishi Sunak, let's be honest. Despite a rebellion, he did manage to scrape through with a victory in a key Commons vote on his Rwanda policy. But the legislation will be back in the Commons in the new year. Has he just delayed the inevitable battle with his own backbenchers? The Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, will join me. Does he really think the government will be able to get its Rwanda bill over the line? Will any planes take off to Rwanda next year? Well, we'll all be gripped. I'll hear from Labour's Wes Streeting too. He's been criticised by some on the left this week for suggesting that the NHS uses the winter as an excuse to ask for more money. I'll be speaking to backbench ringleader Mark Francois, the man who's been nicknamed the Don Corleone of Tory party politics after organising the rebellion this week. And he's back from the jungle. But will he be undertaking the trial of his life by returning to frontline politics? GB News' very own Nigel Farage will be with me in the studio a little later. And crystal balls at the ready, top political bods John Rentoul and Michael Portillo, our very own Michael Portillo, will give us their political predictions for 2024. But let's go through the papers now. Actually, quite a busy set of papers considering we're a week out until Christmas. Nicholas Owen, the former BBC News presenter, joins me now. Nicholas, lovely to see you. Loving the tie.
Well, it's Christmas.
It's suitably bright and festive. Right, let's talk about the Italian job that's been going on this weekend. We've had the Prime Minister meeting with his Italian counterpart, Giorgia Meloni. Interesting relationship that they've struck up, those two.
It is, isn't it? I mean, it seems to be quite a few examples. We're talking later on about Lord Cameron and the German lady and so on. People getting, you might say, slightly different political perspectives in general, but here we have very much a meeting of minds. Sunak using some really strong language now about immigration overwhelming our country altogether.
Yeah.
I mean, these are deep worries that a lot of people will have. And the Italian lady, Giorgia Meloni, she's said it very clearly in Italy, and it's gone down, generally speaking, very well there. A more difficult thing to get over in this country, I would say. But fascinating, as you say, the two of them coming together.
The dynamic between them, because obviously he's associated with being more of a centrist. She's considered very right-wing, and some on the left, you know, sort of say that she's sort of aligned with Mussolini's values, which might be overstating it. However, I just think that's an interesting dynamic. And as you say, the language he's using, hostile states using migration to destabilise the West, was part of his speech yesterday. He's getting tough on it in the rhetoric, but will the Rwanda bill go the distance, do you think, Nicholas?
Well, I just think this Rwanda, it's impossible to get away from the word Rwanda altogether, isn't it? What is it? Is it a country which is sunny uplands? People can go there and have a better life. Why do most migrants come to this country? Why do most people risk their time in boats and other things to come here? I don't think it's to come here and be sort of live off the state and things. People want a better life, don't they? And they're going to get a better life in a country like Rwanda. And here's the big catch, of course. If the general election next year goes the way that everybody seems to think it will, and nothing's for certain in this life, but bookies say it's 90% chance that it's going to be Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, are they going to unwind it? So are people going to end up in Rwanda, a few people on the first plane, and they're going to come smartly back?
I'm going to be asking Wes Streeting that, actually, because I can't quite work out if they axe the Rwanda plan and there are people in Rwanda, what actually happens to them. Let's have a quick word on Rishi Sunak's helicopter. Interesting story in the Sunday Times. Tell me about it, Nicholas.
Well, I take a bit of a view on this. He does bash around in these helicopters. Can't quite remember out of which budget it comes, but it's something like £8 million a year to make sure that the Prime Minister can hop easily from place to place. OK, because you're the leader of the country, you do need to make moves pretty quickly. But there was a plan, apparently, to scrap that. I don't quite know what the alternatives are going to be, but something cheaper was on the way. But it's been revealed, and I think it's something to do like the RAF's House newspaper casually mentioned that it was all going to be changed. There was going to be some sort of economy measure taken. And it was the Prime Minister himself who insisted, no, I want my helicopter, please.
That's interesting.
And I just think, again, it's this messages business. When so many people are struggling, we don't need to... Well, perhaps we should keep repeating that. It just looks bad. It's bad PR.
It's not great optics. Also, it's similarly bad as the optics of him and, indeed, the King and others all taking separate private jets to COP28, which I thought was a bit of an irony. Let's look at the Labour situation when it comes to immigration and what they're saying about Rwanda. There's quite a cheeky story in the Mail on Sunday about a Labour candidate who has been selling children's holidays to the very part of the country that the party insists is unsafe for illegal migrants. So you've got Labour saying we can't send anyone to Rwanda because it's not safe, and now they've selected somebody, I think, to run in Bishop Auckland at the next general election.
Sam Rushworth, I think.
Sam Rushworth, who has a company selling children's holidays out to Rwanda. So is it safe or isn't it? I mean, are the Labour Party flailing on this policy too? Yeah,
it is a bit ironic, isn't it? Yes. There's a strange thing, really. I'm sending children. I mustn't use those words, must I? We're getting into the migration talk, isn't it?
I mean, we say children. I think they're organising gap years.
Yeah, young people.
Teenagers.
Yes, exactly. Go and have experience in Africa. Local people, meet local people, see how other people live and so on. Sounds a lovely idea. But Rwanda? Hang on a minute. Aren't the Labour Party sort of against the Rwanda plan? Well, are they or aren't they? I'm completely confused.
But they're having this policy of sort of being silent assassins and not saying very much about anything beyond sound bites. I mean, there's no substance necessarily to what they're proposing to stop the boats, but I think they can just remain silent and...
Well, we do keep saying this, don't we? Have we quoted him before, Napoleon? The film's on, go and watch the film, but the best line from Napoleon was always, when your enemy is making a mistake, do not interrupt him.
Exactly.
I think...
it's a good policy so far because they're doing all right in the polls. Let's have a look at whether there has been a policy shift on Israel. The Sunday Times is quoting Cameron saying that it's time for a sustainable Gaza ceasefire. Let me just pull a quote out of his actual piece here. He's teamed up with his German counterpart, Annalena Baerbock, and they claim they are focused on a three-pronged strategy. First, they support Israel's right to defend itself, but warn, and I quote, the Israeli government should do more to discriminate sufficiently between terrorists and civilians, ensuring its campaign is targeted on Hamas leaders and operatives. Is this the Foreign Secretary saying that he doesn't think that Israel are being proportionate? This does seem to mark a bit of a shift, I think.
I think it does, yes. I mean... First of all, going back to what we were saying right at the beginning, was a strange alliance here, in a way, between Lord Cameron, David Cameron, Prime Minister, sort of centrist, but basically Conservative, slightly in the right wing, and this lady, her name...
Yes, Baerbock.
Yes, from Germany, Green Party, but they do seem to represent these two disparate strands coming together to say that there's got to be sustainable ceasefires and all this sort of thing. I just think it's all very well to talk like this, isn't it? But Israel, in Benjamin Netanyahu and the people who support him and the IDF, absolutely determined to root out Hamas. And the only way they see of doing that is to be, frankly, incredibly brutal. There's no other way of putting it, is it? And let's not forget what happened to those 3 hostages who came out waving white flags.
Yeah, there was friendly fire and they were gunned down, unfortunately.
How you get... It's easy to talk in these terms about slowing down, you know, having more, trying not to prevent it, trying not to have any more civilian casualties. It seems to me an almost impossible thing to resolve, absolutely impossible thing. But in the background, there are whispers that there's a new deal on the way involving the Qataris, inevitably always seem to be the referees in these things. Some talk that the security chief from Mossad, the chap here in the Israeli Secret Service, basically, be meeting the Qatari somewhere in Europe. It's always in these rather vague terms. So perhaps something new will be coming out. Perhaps there can be some way to pause it.
Well, this seems to be...
It seems to me to be...
Might be wishful thinking.
Very, very wishful thinking.
I mean, also, another shift that we've seen is this military strike that's covered in the Sunday Express and all of the papers, but it's on page 11 of the Express, saying Navy strikes down attack drone. I mean, that seems to mark somewhat of an escalation. I don't think that we have... taken down a drone like this in a decade.
I don't think the Navy's fired a shot in anger for about 10, 11 years, something like that. But the Americans have. The Americans have been doing quite a lot. This is the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who they're very, very similar to Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're all proxies for Iran. That's the point. The Houthis have been attacking ships and threatening shipping in the Red Sea. Do you know, I think, honestly, Camilla, I think people have rather not taking their eye off the ball on this one. That's an absolutely critical trade route for the whole world. And if these Houthi rebels really start threatening in the way that they are, some of the big shipping lines, Maersk and all these others, have actually stopped sailings. This is absolutely...
It's a really worrying development, actually.
Very, very worrying situation. But isn't it interesting? A point I'm not sure I've made here on GB News before, but what do we actually see people like Iran doing? Only acting through these third parties.
Yes.
No direct support for Hamas in any shape or form, whatever. I think that is the most fascinating thing in the background.
And also increasing numbers of Iranians trying to sort of fight back against the Ayatollah and some of the mullahs because they're not happy with the way that Iran is going and the murder of the schoolgirl with the hijab and everything else going on. You know, the Iranian resistant movement in the background is clearly putting a lot of pressure on Iran in general. A final word, Nicholas, as a former BBC man, about Oliver Dowden, who's coming up on the show momentarily, talking about the BBC being doomsters and saying that some of the Conservative Party's woes have been caused by the national broadcaster. He also makes a point and has a little dig at Gary Lineker. Briefly, Nicholas, what's your view on that?
Well, I've been here before to say that Gary Lineker, I think, was wrong. I said that a long time ago. You and I had this conversation.
Saying that. No, Lineker doesn't seem to be listening, funny enough. I mean, we've even got the BBC chairman saying he's wrong, but there we go.
Exactly. Perhaps the new boss of the BBC will slap him down. Well, Oliver Dowden, I'm sorry, sir. The fact is, most people think that it's time for you to go, your party, and I do not think we can blame the BBC for that. I am awfully sorry.
No. And do you think, by the way, that Lineker needs to be further disciplined? I mean, there's people calling for him to go. There's even a warning from the Tories saying, but in the run-up to the general election, we can't have you opining any further, because last week he made an attack on Grant Shapps quite personal. And I think it's one thing to talk about policy, but quite another to kind of lampoon politicians on social media if you're working for the BBC.
Well, I think it's ridiculous. I can't help feeling that Gary Lineker knows he's in an incredibly strong position, because if the BBC should actually turn around and say, you have broken your contract, it's the end for you on the BBC. He doesn't need to worry, does he? I mean, lots of other people, lots of other broadcasters, no doubt, particularly in the sporting world, would love to have Gary Lineker. So he might
also,
think he's
there's lots of sports presenters that would love to have Gary Lineker's job.
Indeed.
So if he moved from Match of the Day and went somewhere else, I mean, it just seems to be an ongoing problem that the BBC can't seem to solve.
No. Poor old Beeb. Poor old
Bee. Well,
old
anyway,
Bee.
we don't want to talk about the BBC because, of course, we have all views here on GB News, Lineker-esque or the complete polar opposite, and that's why we can speak freely on the People's Channel. Nicholas Owen, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Have a very happy Christmas.
And
lovely to see you, and thank you for your contribution all year round. Well, don't go anywhere because, as I say, we've got a Christmas cracker of a show lined up. I'm going to be quizzing the Don Corleone of Tory backbenchers, Mark Francois, just after the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry, here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It is going to be quite a blustery, windy day for the vast majority of us. Some very tightly spaced isobars across much of the UK, providing gale-strength winds in places. It's also going to be a very wet day for western areas of Scotland, with this trailing weather system that is essentially stalled across this region and will provide heavy and persistent rainfall to the Highlands, Isle of Skye, Argyll and Bute. Do take care, an amber weather warning is in force. Significant disruption is possible from flooding and even landslides. Elsewhere, it will be a drier day. The cloud wants to break its way up into the afternoon, particularly to the northeast of higher ground, so the best of sunnier breaks through central eastern England, parts of northeast Scotland as well, where we'll see temperatures climb to highs of 13 degrees Celsius. The rain will eventually ease its way off for western Scotland as we head into the overnight period, but it's going to push its way southwards as a result, spreading across Northern Ireland, northwest England, into the far north of Wales as well. The far southeast holding on to a drier night, still a mild one here, lows of 9 degrees Celsius, but some drier and clearer spells pushing their way into northwest Scotland as we start off Monday, so generally a better day here. Elsewhere though, Monday looks to be rather drab, dreary and damp with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Quite murky in places, hill fog across Eryri, the Pennines, the Cheviot. Still blustery across areas of England and Wales, but the winds easing out for Northern Ireland, central areas of Scotland. Further rain is on the cards as we head towards Tuesday and Wednesday as well, so keep up to date with the forecast. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lovely to have your company this Sunday morning. I'm joined now by Mark Francois, the Conservative MP for Rayleigh and Wickford, the Don Corleone, apparently, of the Conservative Party, because you're at the head, Mark, of the ERG, the European Research Group, and that's one of the 5 families we hear of caucuses on the right. I mean, is this all a bit ridiculous to be talking about 5 families and you're some sort of godfather and Don Corleone figure?
I think it's probably a bit overblown, Camilla.
Yeah.
My late mother Anna was Italian, so I'm half Italian by birth.
Are you?
My middle name is Gino.
Is it now?
Yes.
God, knock us up a pasta pesto.
Well, look, so there's some Italian heritage there, but I think some of your colleagues in the media have been getting a little bit excitable about this. But look, this problem is a problem across the Western world. It's not just a problem that's unique to the United Kingdom.
What, immigration you're talking about?
Yeah, illegal immigration.
Yes.
Mass immigration. And we need legislation that will allow us to stop the boats coming. The Prime Minister pledged to do it. We have to deliver that pledge. The issue is the bill as it's currently drafted, as pointed out by the so-called Star Chamber, our team of legal eagles led by Sibylle Cash, pointed out there are a number of holes in the bill. That's really why Robert Jenrick resigned on a point of principle, and he laid those out in Parliament. So the bill has to be amended in order to, as it were, to plug those holes so that aircraft can take off to Rwanda so that there is a deterrent.
Do you think that aircraft are ever going to take off to Rwanda? Be real about this, because only 1% of the British population think this plan is actually going to work.
They could do, providing the legislation is sufficiently robust to permit it happen.
But then isn't it a fair argument to say that you and your fellow caucuses are in danger of making perfect the enemy of the good? Well, because the legislation is there. If you block it, then what actually happens to the Rwanda plan? And in the process, you're in danger of completely undermining the Prime Minister and his authority.
Well, if the good doesn't work, then it's not good enough. It needs to be good enough. Now, on a positive note, Sibylle Cash is already talking to government lawyers about trying to come up with an amendment that actually, if you like, would fill those holes. That would be a very positive thing too. If anybody can draft that amendment, it's Bill.
Yes.
So he and others are talking to the government in a positive way about trying to draft something to make sure that the bill is fit for purpose, and that amendment will be tabled in time for the committee stage, which is probably going to be in the second half of January.
Michael Gove told me on the show last week that he felt that this deal, because we were talking in terms of it being half fat or full fat, and I was saying that the righties wanted it to be full fat, and he replied that it was Jersey gold top legislation.
Well, to use your analogy, it needs to be fat enough, and I believe that it should be, with goodwill, it should be possible to come up with legislation that actually is fit for purpose without upsetting other people.
But talking about fattening things up, I mean, my impression of you guys last week is you threatening this rebellion. Are you just turkeys voting for Christmas? You conclude, actually, in reality, that you're not going to vote against the legislation, even though you don't like the legislation. So you decide to go for an abstention, which is sort of a fudge, a fence-sitting exercise, because you're all deeply worried about losing your seats. I mean, the criticism of you, your caucus of MPs, is that you're just blowhards and your bark is bigger than your bite. Otherwise, you would have voted the legislation down.
So we abstained because we took the Prime Minister at his word, so we took a more moderate course of action, and now we're being criticised for it. So what we did, the Prime Minister said he was prepared to entertain tightening up the bill. There are obviously lots of discussions that went on behind the scenes. We took him at his word. So rather than try and vote the bill down at second reading, we abstain to allow a breathing space in order to come up with some amendments, which is what Bill is working on now.
I know, but then this is the problem, right?
But if I make a... I actually think that was a sensible decision to take, but we do have to get this right because the public won't forgive us if we don't.
No, but then there was quite a lot of argy-bargy, I understand, last week with the whips and everything. Meanwhile, you've got a situation where half of the party refuses to vote for this legislation if it isn't amended, and then the other half of the party, the One Nation group, refusing to vote for the legislation if it is. And so people watching and listening to this programme might just think to themselves, what is wrong with the Conservative Party? Why can't you just show some collective responsibility? It is a case, I think, as the Prime Minister said to the 1922, of unite or die. I mean, just how many Prime Ministers does the ERG and other groups want to bring down over legislation?
Well, look, Damien Green and I, Damien Green heads the One Nation caucus, so you could say sort of my opposite number, if you like. And we were chatting quite amicably at a number 10 reception in the week. Some journo wrote up that, you know, we hate each other's guts. We don't. We both fought the same seat. We both fought Ken Livingstone in Brent East when we were starting out in our political careers. Damien fought it in 92, I fought it in 97. Kwasi Kwarteng fought the same seat, so did David Gork, incidentally. So actually, Damien and I, on a personal level, have always got on. We even, at the risk of betraying a confidence, we even talked about maybe going out for a drink or a meal sometime in the new year to see if we could find some way through.
Okay.
So who knew?
Well, let's just know, and we'll send along a photographer for that flouting.
Yeah. But what I mean is, I think there is a reservoir of goodwill on both sides of the party to try and get this issue right. And I think we have to do that because we've had previous legislation that said it would help to stop the boats. Now, in fairness, the flow has reduced. It's down by a third, but it patently hasn't stopped. And what I think we need to do is to get people from across the Conservative Party to try and work together to see if we can find a way through.
What do you think of Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister? Because you never supported him. He's not your kind of Tory. So is he mismanaging this whole situation?
No. I think, let me put it like this. Stopping the boats is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Where are we? Some people think there could be a general election on the 2nd of May to coincide with the local elections.
Do you think that?
Well, my instinct is, partly for economic reasons, it's going to be the autumn. But it could be. Let's just assume for a moment it's the 2nd of May. right? In which case, even if you have a relatively short campaign, Parliament would have to be dissolved, which is the starting gun for the general election, in mid-April. Today is the 17th of December, so we're less than 4 months from the beginning of a general election campaign in that scenario. We've been 20 points behind consistently in the poll of polls for longer than that. John Curtis, the BBC's, electoral guru, said if things stay as they are, we could be reduced to 130 seats. That's where we are, and there's no point pretending that we're not. So I would say that, whether you're in the ERG or the TRG, across the Conservative Party, it is time to wake up and smell the coffee. Because if things remain as they are, we are heading for a defeat. We don't want to lose. We don't want a Labour government. So we're all going to have to work together to do something about it. What should that something be? We have a number of good policies, but they're atomised. I think what's missing, and some of your colleagues in the media have pointed this out, you've pointed this out, there's no overall compelling narrative, as you would say.
Right.
There's no overall
Well, give me a narrative that you would like the Prime Minister to spout.
Well, let me just finish the point, and then, what we need is an overall story, a song to sing, if you like, that we can take out on the doorstep.
All right, so what are the lyrics of this song, Mark?
Well, I'd give you one example, personally, rather than write the manifesto sitting here in your studio. I'm very keen that we make a commitment to abolish inheritance tax.
Yeah.
I think that is aspirational.
Okay, so give me policies. Abolish inheritance tax, bring tax down.
Well, I mean, that would be one example, I think, of how we can spend the money.
Yeah.
Yes. I personally think that there's more that we could do on defence. I think defence will be quite a big issue in the general election, actually, not least what's going on.
But then people listening and watching this will think, well, if you don't have confidence in the Prime Minister, why on earth should they?
No, I didn't say that. But what I said...
you seem to feel... You seem to be suggesting he's not doing a very good job.
No, look, I think Rishi Sunak will lead us into the general election, right? Let's be clear about that.
He won't lead you out of the general election, though, will he? Well, I mean, wouldn't you prefer Suella to be Prime Minister?
I have a great deal of respect for Suella Braverman, but I think Rishi Sunak will lead us into the election, Camilla. But what I'm saying is, I don't think we need to change the leader, but we do need to change the strategy, because we're consistently 20 points down, and there's no point...
Are you worried about Nigel Farage rejoining Reform? Reform creates huge problems for a right-winger like you, doesn't it?
Well, I've known Nigel for many years. He's a rock-star politician. There's no denying.
Would you like him back in the Tory party?
Well, I think we've always been a broad church. I think there's some room on the right pew.
Is there? All right. So would you like Nigel Farage to be in the party and be a future Prime Minister under the Tories?
Camilla, I think you're going about 5 fences ahead. Your question to me was, can I countenance Nigel Farage one day rejoining the Conservative Party? And I think the answer to that is yes.
So you'd rather him join the Conservative Party than the right-wing caucus to which you belong breaking away if there's electoral oblivion come next year and going to Reform? Would you countenance going to Reform?
No, I don't think we want to break away from anywhere. We're Conservatives. Look, whether you're me or Damien Green, you don't want Keir Starmer to win the election. You don't want a Labour government, right? Now, as I said, I fought Brent East in '97 in the dying embers of the major government. By then, people had gone for Blair in a big way. You could feel it. What is different, here's our opportunity, if we take it, people have not gone over to Starmer anything like in the same way they did for Blair, because the public look at Starmer and they see something of an empty vessel. That's our opportunity. We can win this election, but we need the ammunition with which to fight.
On that note, Mark Francois, thank you very, very much for joining me. Lots more to come on the programme, including Nigel Farage, who has just been spoken about. Don't go anywhere.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Ah!
No, thank you. my CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. So much more to come in the next hour. I'm going to be hearing from the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, Labour's Wes Streeting and Mr Brexit himself, Nigel Farage. All that and more after the news with Sam Francis.
Camilla, thank you. Good morning. I'm Sam Francis in the GB Newsroom. The headlines at 10. There's growing pressure this morning on Israel, with David Cameron joining Germany's foreign minister in calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. In a joint article for the Sunday Times, the Foreign Secretary warns that too many civilians have been killed and it's time for a sustainable ceasefire. The intervention is a significant shift in the government's tone on Israel's war against Hamas terrorists. However, Lord Cameron stopped short of calling for an immediate ceasefire. His comments come a day after Israel admitted it mistakenly shot and killed 3 hostages as they attempted to flee captivity. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister has suggested that fresh talks may be underway, aimed at securing the release of more hostages. Benjamin Netanyahu told reporters that the Gaza offensive had helped lead the release of some hostages in November. Rishi Sunak says hostile states are to blame for Britain's migration crisis as he works to rally more support for what he's called the radical measures to prevent illegal migration. The Prime Minister said that opposing nations would drive people to our shores here in the UK to destabilise the West unless leaders cracked down on small boat crossings. It comes after Rishi Sunak travelled to Rome to meet Italy's right-wing Prime Minister. He told Giorgia Meloni that growing migration numbers are overwhelming the ability for international governments to help those who need it most. The teenager who disappeared 6 years ago has been reunited with his family here in the UK. Alex Batty was 11 when he went missing on holiday in Spain. It's thought he was taken by his mother and his grandfather, who were not his legal guardians, to live in an alternative lifestyle abroad. He was found last week walking alone on a remote stretch of road in the south of France. Police say that they are still determining whether a criminal investigation will be launched.
I think it's fantastic news. This is a young man. He's still a child. He's 17. He's reunited with his family, and as you say, just before Christmas. So yeah, it's brilliant news for Alex. But as I said earlier, we do want the community and media just to respect the privacy of the family at this time.
Laws on drink spiking are to be modernised as calls grow for more action to protect women. More than 5,000 cases of needle and drink spiking were reported to police in England and Wales last year, and there are now calls to make it a specific offence. Well, Michael Kill, who represents over 100 nightclubs and live music venues, said to us this morning here on GB News that the scale of the problem isn't really known.
This announcement has been hugely welcomed by the industry. Particularly around the sort of categorisation, because the big thing that we're missing is the data. The data has been a hugely a huge shortcoming for this, and it's something that we've been working alongside government and key stakeholders like Stamp Out and Spiking to try and get to this point. So very, very positive news to hear this yesterday.
Well, that's the latest from the GB Newsroom. For more, we're across the UK on your TV, on digital radio and, of course, on our website as well. This is GB News.
Thank you, Sam. Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lots more still to come. In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by the Shadow Health Secretary, Labour's Wes Streeting. I'm going to be speaking to the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden. Mr Brexit, Nigel Farage himself, will be here in the studio with me. And crystal balls at the ready, because I'm going to be joined by two political doyens, the Independent's John Rentoul and former Defence Secretary Michael Portillo, to give me their predictions for 2024. But first of all, I'm hoping that Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary and Labour MP for Ilford North, can hear me and has joined me this morning. Wes, lovely to see you. Merry Christmas to you. I'm confused.
Good morning,
because you've said recently, I don't think it's good enough that the NHS uses every winter crisis and every challenge it faces as an excuse to ask for more money. But today, the Labour Party has released a press release accusing the government of sending the NHS naked into the winter. So you're now weaponising the winter crisis, having said that they shouldn't be weaponising the winter crisis.
No, of course we recognise the winter crisis. I mean, this has become an annual feature under the Conservatives in a way that it wasn't under Labour. My criticism of the Prime Minister is that he hasn't followed through on the pledges he made back in January to make sure that the NHS wasn't as exposed to the winter as it has been in recent years. He's failed on beds, he's failed on ambulances, he's failed on delayed discharges. There are 1 in 9 people in our hospitals who are fit for medical discharge but are unable to go back into the community because the support isn't there. That's equivalent to more than 24 hospitals of patients who are well enough to leave. So my argument about the NHS is that, of course, investment and, of course, money is a challenge, but it's got to go alongside reform. And in all of the commitments that Labour has made, they're fully costed and fully funded and also directly linked to reform, because I'm concerned that thinking about the longer-term future of the NHS, with a growing ageing population, rising chronic disease and rising cost pressures, unless we keep a sharp eye on the costs, they risk spiralling out of control, and not only will patients overwhelm the NHS with demand, but we'll see the NHS bankrupted because of a failure to keep a grip on costs. So I'm just trying to send a message to everyone that the public finances are in a mess thanks to this shower of a government. Money is going to be tight, and we've got to make sure that every penny of taxpayers' money is well spent. And the argument on the NHS can't just be more money, it has to be reform and modernisation. Otherwise, I fear that our NHS, as it has been for 75 years, a public service free at the point of use, something I fundamentally believe in, will be at risk.
Although, how are the Labour Party going to cope with the spiralling costs of the NHS, Wes, when you want to be giving junior doctors and others huge pay rises?
Well, look, the government has got to negotiate an end to this industrial action. It is causing untold damage in terms of cancelled appointments and
how much should they give the doctors then?
Procedures. It also risks staff walking out of the NHS altogether. Now, I've been clear that I can't say that if there's a Labour government, we'll be able to meet the 35% pay demand of junior doctors.
Well, if you did, you'd be bankrupting the NHS,
wouldn't you? We would be willing to sit down and negotiate. Well, and that's why I've been honest with people that the Labour Party can't just come in and meet these demands. The lesson of the last Labour government, which delivered the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction in the history of the NHS, whilst paying staff fairly, is that you've got to get the economy growing, because when the economy grows, you can invest in public services without hiking up taxes on people on lower middle incomes in the way that the Conservatives had. And that's the other reason why I'm being so firm about how much money there will be to go around, because the last Labour government was able to say, well, we'll invest in the NHS by putting a penny on national insurance. People simply can't afford tax rises on lower middle incomes now because the Conservatives have hiked them up. In fact, we had to fight them hard to get them to U-turn on their own national insurance increase.
But
so
people
that's
will be
why
asking
I make the
themselves,
argument that investment's important, but so is reform.
But people will be asking themselves, Wes, you know, at the end of the day, you're talking about the NHS being in a cash crisis and that it might go bankrupt under the Tories, but the Labour Party are likely to spend much more on it, not least if you're willing to entertain anything close to a 35% pay rise.
Well, all of the pledges we're making are fully costed and fully funded, not just on the NHS, but everything else. And in terms of our NHS pledges linked to reform, for example, the £1.1 billion that we will put into delivering 2 million more appointments a year through extra evening and weekend clinics is linked to the reform of the type we saw on the front page of the Times this week about what they're doing at Guy's and St Thomas's to significantly reduce the backlog. Our commitment to mental health hubs in every community and mental health support in every school is a reform investment, because it diverts people away from A&E and from overstretched GPs. So, and in some cases, as with bringing back the family doctor, that's not about putting more money in, that's about scrapping some of the red tape that's tying doctors up in knots, diverting them away from the care they want to be providing to patients, because we put them under about 55 accountability measures, which is just absurd. So
part of
that's
the
how we're
GP
thinking
crisis
in a very
was
practical and hard-headed way.
But part of the GP crisis was caused by Labour, wasn't it? Because Tony Blair allowed doctors to work for less hours for more pay because of the contract. So how are you going to unravel that? You're talking about Australia-inspired GP hubs. How are you going to staff them if doctors don't want to work the hours that my father, who was a GP in the 80s and 90s, used to work?
Well, I don't think it's fair to blame the Prime Minister that delivered an NHS so good that people were complaining that they were having to see a GP within 48 hours and were struggling to book ahead. I mean, wouldn't that be a nice problem to have now? But look, the Conservatives have run down general practice. There are 2,000 fewer GPs. Those GPs are busting a gut. They're providing 1 million more appointments now than they were before the pandemic, but there aren't enough of them, and too much of what we ask of them is pointless accountability and red tape that would be better directed in terms of that time and resource towards that family-doctor relationship, which we know that GPs value and enjoy, patients really value, and all of the evidence says is crucial for getting better outcomes for patients.
Can we talk about Rwanda? Is it a safe country? One of your candidates for the Bishop Auckland seat has been sending teenagers on gap years, seemingly, to Rwanda. So is it safe or not?
Hang on, I don't think you can compare a not-for-profit programme to give young people the opportunity to engage in cultural exchange with young people from Rwanda to the government's failed Rwanda deportation scheme, which has seen hundreds of millions of pounds of our money given away and not a single flight taking off apart from the ones filled with Home Secretaries and loads of our cash.
But tell me this, then.
That's an utterly absurd comparison. Of course, Rwanda is a place where people can go as tourists, but unless I'm mistaken, I don't think that the organisation you mentioned mentioned, providing those opportunities for young people, left the kids in Rwanda and flew back.
No, OK, well, tell me this then.
I don't think we're in a serious position on this Rwanda policy, because it's not delivering any real benefit to the country, and it's costing a fortune.
Square this circle for us then. Say if you do get into power at the next general election and flights have taken off to Rwanda and people have been sent there, what is the Labour Party then going to do with them? Bring them back to the UK?
Well, no, they'll have been sent over there, but
so you'll leave them there?
I can't say that I'm particularly I can't say I'm particularly optimistic about any of these flights taking off.
So you would leave these people in Rwanda?
Disaster of a scheme, and the penny has dropped for the Conservative Party.
But will you leave them in Rwanda?
As they tear themselves apart, they realise that even if this scheme is working, we'll see about 100-odd people sent to Rwanda.
Are you going to leave those people in Rwanda, Mr. Streeting?
Small boats just the other week. So I think if you have to look at the terms of the agreement that this government has signed, this is their responsibility. It's happened on their watch, and so far the only outcome we've seen from this Rwanda policy is the Rwandan government laughing all the way to the bank, because the silly British government has handed over hundreds of millions of pounds.
OK, but you would leave these people there?
Not a single deportation flight taking off.
You wouldn't bring them back, you'd leave them there?
I'm not the Shadow Home Secretary. I'd have to look at the detail of I'd have to look at the detail of the agreement. But,
Mr. Streeting, thank you, Wes.
You know, once people are settled, you can't just undo that.
All right, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Have a very Merry Christmas. Listening to that was Nicholas Owen, our paper reviewer extraordinaire. Very briefly, because we're just going to wait for Deputy PM Oliver Dowden to be ready to speak to me. Really briefly, your reaction to that, Nicholas?
Well, it was back to what you and I were talking about, wasn't it? What would be the Labour Party position? Well done, you, for sticking with it.
He's very good at talking to fill out an interview, Wes Streeting. He's a good media operator.
He's going to do jolly well, but we didn't really get the answer, did we?
No.
I think it did say at the end he is going to leave them there if any of them get there, if anybody gets there.
Do you think people will get there next year? Really?
Frankly, I don't think this policy workable, frankly, but that's my view.
Don't you think it's interesting that the Prime Minister's sort of clinging onto it for dear life, even though I think on the doorstep people are concerned about illegal immigrants, certainly. Is the Tory electorate or any electorate desperately clamouring for Rwanda to work?
I don't think they are at all. I think everybody I speak to about this have all sorts of political views, and thank goodness I have friends who think all sorts of different ways, from absolute left to far right. I haven't had one person say to me, that sounds like a jolly good idea. Yes, they'll ship them off to Rwanda. What a very... I think it's a non-starter. I really do think it's a non-starter.
It's interesting. Also, do we think that Keir Starmer needs to nail his colours to the mast a bit more next year? I mean, I heard from you earlier sort of saying about, and indeed we heard from Mark Francois, sort of talking about whether the Labour Party are all soundbite and not enough substance, and this idea that Starmer isn't really Blair because nobody really understands his vision. He doesn't have that kind of new Labour vision, that kind of Thatcherite Labourism that Tony Blair was associated with, like it or loathe it. I mean, some people on the left hated it. But it's like, who is Keir Starmer? What does he actually stand for ideologically? Or is he just another career politician? This is the trouble.
Well, of course, absolutely. But I go back to what I said earlier on. Really, Labour, our best bet is just to say as little as possible about all these things. They're coasting along. Can there ever have been an occasion when an election looked more likely to go this particular way? I know there could be upsets along the way, but frankly, I think the whole country just feels this government has had so many chances to get things right. So many things have gone wrong. Let's give the other guys a chance. That's the oldest way.
But then is it a clamour for people who
always thought?
I agree with you, but I'm wondering whether Tories are clamouring to vote for Starmer, or they're just clamouring to maybe defect to reform, or give the Tories a bloody nose by not turning out at all.
I think reform. If I was sitting where you do, and your producers here at GB News, this is the very interesting story, isn't it? Is this really a new political movement on the rise or not? We toss the name around, but can anybody name anybody connected with reform? I'm not sure that I can.
I mean, obviously Farage and Richard Tice.
Yes.
It doesn't have the momentum of the Brexit Party, but it's like, have they kind of unleashed fully yet? I mean, I'll be asking Nigel about this later.
Yes.
Is he going to take to the helm? I don't quite know what Richard Tice makes of me constantly asking him, are you going to return to the helm? Because obviously there isn't a vacancy right now, but I just don't think reform works without Farage in a key role.
Yes, you need.
Okay.
You certainly need a very,
Nicholas,
very big and heavy hitter.
Thank you very much.
Keep at them.
Keep at them.
Keep at them.
Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister, joins me now, also the MP for Hertsmere. Lovely to see you, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good
Happy
morning.
Christmas.
Nice to see
You're looking
you,
festive
Camilla.
over there with the tree next to you.
Merry Christmas to you too, if it's a little bit early.
It is a little
Not
early.
my choice of backdrop, but it's very nice. Isn't it?
Never too early. Now, look, I don't want to ruin your Christmas cheer, Mr Dowden, but let's have a look at Rishi Sunak's 5-point plan. He said that he would stop the boats by the end of the year, that debt would be falling, that he would grow the economy, that he would halve inflation, and he would cut NHS waiting lists. It's not really been a success. We can perhaps give him inflation, but that's more or less it. So actually, this 5-point plan has turned out to be a failure, hasn't it?
Well, let's take each of them in turn. As you rightly say, we've actually halved inflation. And that has a real consequence, by the way. It means that now we're seeing wages rising faster than inflation. And when those tax cuts we announced recently come into force at the beginning of January, people are going to get 450 quid more in their pockets next year. So I think we can give that one
Not
quite a
stop
large
the boats.
thumbs up.
Debt hasn't come down. Waiting lists are going up. The economy is stagnant.
Well, let's deal next with stopping the boats. If you'd said at the beginning of the year that we'd managed to get the number of boats down by a third, when if you look, for example, at Italy, the number are up 80%. We're making progress, but key to that is our Rwanda legislation, which, by the way, Conservatives backed and every single Labour and Lib Dem MP voted against. We've got more to do on that, but I would say we're making progress on it.
But only 1% of the British public think the plan will work. So it's hardly a ringing endorsement from a political perspective, is it, Mr Dowden?
Well, I'm actually confident that this legislation does the job.
You said that to me last year, though. You said you were confident these flights would take off.
It's aimed at ending this vicious cycle of litigation, stopping people being removed to Rwanda who've arrived here illegally and can't be deported to their home country, and entrenching the treaty that was entered into by the Home Secretary. If you then move on to the others, which I think you started on, which was in respect of growth, actually the growth forecasts have been revised upwards in terms of our bouncing out of COVID. And if you look at the strength of the UK economy, whether it's having the third largest AI sector in the world after the US and China, whether you look at the fact that actually our manufacturing base is now bigger than France, I'm actually really confident when I talk to
Mr Dowden
and others about the prospects for this country, and they say, why are you talking us down? It's been difficult, but I think there is real progress to come next year.
I'm never one to talk Britain down, or indeed its economy. I'm a champion for Britain and all it stands for, but I'm sorry, you cannot possibly look at the growth forecasts that have been produced in line with the autumn statement and be cheering them from the rafters. It's stagnant. You know, we should be growing much more quickly and at a much greater rate. And that's on you. That's on 13 years of Tory rule. Why are we in this situation? You can't be celebrating that.
Well, actually, if you look at the autumn statement, if you look at the measures we announced, that the OBR themselves acknowledged that it add an extra 0.5% to growth. If you look at our performance over 25 to 28, the next period, it sees us growing faster than France, Germany, and many other countries. But of course, there is more to do, and that's why, for example, we're focusing on business investment, and thanks to the full deduction of expenses, we're seeing greater business investment in this country than even a country like the United States. What I'm saying really is that the measures that the Prime Minister and Chancellor announced are actually putting the building blocks in place to deal with the growth challenge, which I don't doubt has been a big problem.
But they're not working, are they? Because Rishi Sunak's approval rating keeps on tanking. He's now less popular than Boris Johnson was when he resigned. His approval rating is -49. I've had Mark Francois on here earlier, and you'll be familiar with his ERG group and the caucus of right-wingers within the party that want this legislation to be amended. He's basically saying that it's do or die. And as far as these figures are concerned, I mean, Rishi Sunak is now less popular than he was a year ago.
Well, actually, if you look at what Rishi Sunak has done over the past year, he has been taking difficult decisions, which I think will yield results, and then has made progress, whether that's signing that CTPPP, entering into the largest trading bloc in the world, whether it's finally moving us to a post-Brexit world with the Windsor framework, whether it's the biggest tax cuts that we've had since the 1980s.
But it's not moved the dial, Mr. Dowden.
When you take difficult decisions, when you take those difficult decisions, it takes a while for the results to be seen.
But you haven't got long, have you?
Next year, people will see the benefit of that. And moreover, it actually relates to that point, which is, in the years before an election is all what do you think of the incumbent government. When you get into an election year, it's a contrast. And there's a contrast between what I've described about Rishi Sunak and the government and Labour. I caught the end of what you were saying, this idea that Starmer is trying to be like Blair in the run-up to 97, carrying the Ming vase across the highly polished floor, not dropping it. People would be wise to the fact that when it comes to Rwanda or any of these other issues, he just thinks by keeping stum, it can come to him. Well, I think that's not going to sustain next year. When
two more quick questions.
This person that can be in one parliament, both Thatcherite and a Corbynite, it's extraordinary.
Two more quick questions. Are you going to amend this Rwanda legislation to keep the right of the party happy?
Well, we will make sure that we have the right piece of legislation. It's not about keeping
Are you going to amend
one
it?
Part of the party happy or another part of the happy. Look, I'm confident that the Prime Minister has looked at this very carefully and has got the best possible measures. But if there are ways of improving it further, just as with any piece of legislation, we'll work with backbench members of Parliament, including Conservatives. If we can make it even better, of course we'll do that.
And should we see all of Lord Cameron's financial interests? They've been covered up by a blind trust. That's not right. He's a very senior member of the Cabinet. He's Foreign Secretary. Why is all of this being kept under wraps?
Well, we have a process for doing this. There's an independent advisor on ministers' interests. He goes through all of the interests and then he advises on the most appropriate ones to declare. That advice has been followed fully. It's the way that's been dealt with for many years, and I think that's the appropriate way to address these things.
If they are Chinese or indeed UAE-controlled interests, Nigel Farage is right to have written in the Telegraph yesterday that Lord Cameron should have nothing to do with the decision-making around the ownership of the Telegraph. Should he, Mr. Dowden? You're a former Culture Secretary. What do you think of the idea of a national newspaper being owned by a foreign state?
Well, I have to be a little careful on this one because there's two potential decisions makers in respect of this. First of all, there's the Culture Secretary, and you know where she's got to in terms of issuing that notice and it going to the
What do you
CMA.
think, though?
There may be an issue at some point. But this is the key point. There's also a process under the National Security and Investment Act where I make decisions in a quasi-judicial capacity. So I can't prejudge any decisions that may come to me in respect of it. But in your wider point in the role of the Foreign Secretary, it really is the Culture Secretary and the NSIA process. Those are independent quasi-judicial processes.
And finally, I'm speaking to Nigel Farage in just a moment. Would you welcome him back into the Conservative Party, Mr. Dowden?
Well, I don't think the Conservative Party needs Nigel Farage to win the next election. Nigel Farage has been supporting UKIP for many years. If he wishes to join the Conservative Party, that's a matter for him.
But aren't you worried about the threat from reform? They're at 11% now in the polls. They're going to eviscerate some of the Tory votes in the shires, aren't they?
Well, you know better than I do, Camilla, that these polls go up and down. In the end, there's only two people that can be Prime Minister after the next election, Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer, and we will be making vigorously the case for Rishi Sunak to be our Prime Minister with a majority Conservative government.
Oliver Dowden, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Well, don't go anywhere because, as I've just said, he's going to be in the studio, back from the jungle. What I want to know, though, is Nigel Farage actually going to be re-entering front-line politics anytime soon? I'll be hearing from the man himself in just a minute. Don't go anywhere.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akua, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lovely to have your company on this Sunday morning. Nigel Farage joins me now, Honorary President, I forget this is your title, and founder of Reform UK. And indeed, my fellow GB News colleague and jungle hero. Shall we call you that, Nigel?
Well, I don't mind if you do.
How did you get on then? What did you learn most about yourself when you were out there, do you think?
My biggest fear was physically, could I get through it?
Yes.
You know, I was a lot older than the rest of the people there.
Yes.
Plus, I've got 1 or 2 injuries that I'm carrying
Indeed.
from plane crashes, car crashes, whatever. So the big fear was, would my back hold up to it? Would I get through? And what I learned was, easy really.
Yeah.
The more exercise you get, the stronger you become. So I left there after 23 nights in the jungle, no tea, no coffee, no salt, no sugar, no alcohol. Lots of exercise.
Looking lean and mean.
And yeah, you know, fitter and stronger than I've been since I was at school. So I learned that I could do it. I also learned something else, which I never would have believed, and that was that I could totally overcome all my fears.
What was your greatest fear going in?
The Bush Tucker trials and my
you
fear
stormed
was,
through those.
Well, my fear was that I'd show fear, I'd look weak.
Yes.
I didn't want that, and that may sound a bit of a old-fashioned, stiff upper lip approach to things. But I managed to overcome all of that. And it was interesting because I was in there with some really fit, strong young people.
Yeah.
And then some of them were having nightmares about the trials, about the insects, the snakes. And I just breezed through it all. So no, I was really pleased with the whole thing. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'd do it again.
And what's the reaction been now that you're out? I mean, obviously, I think that the impetus behind doing it, apart from a big fat check, let's be honest, is also the fact that you can broaden your horizons, you can appeal to a greater number of people who might not be familiar with the Brexit stuff and see you in a new light. Was that the intention?
Well, there are 2 points, really. I mean, firstly, there are lots of people out there who were 12 at the time of the referendum,
Yes.
who are now of voting age, who don't really know much about Nigel Farage. That was useful. Secondly, a lot of people out there who have come to hate me because of what was written about me in these rags.
Yeah. Well, and one of them isn't a rag.
Well,
one of them is an esteemed organ of news.
For the moment.
Yeah, quite. We'll get onto that in a minute. Yeah, thank you.
So people do form their perceptions on the basis of what other people say, and I did think this was a real opportunity. You can't, over 3.5 weeks, pretend to be any different to what you are. I mean, a number of people in the first few days have come up to me and said, look, Nigel, we never really liked you before, but actually we think you're an ordinary, normal bloke.
Yeah.
So I think it's done me a lot of good, and there's some polling out amongst 2019 Conservative voters suggesting a 20% shift in my favour.
Oh, this is it. Why are you looking at polling about your political favour when you're not?
Well, because people send it to me, and let's face it, voters are people.
Let's drill into this, please, because we need to know what you're planning.
Well, I do too.
Well, what are you planning?
Nothing at the moment.
Why not?
Well, I've just come out of, nearly a month away.
Lots of thinking time, though.
Yes, and I think this Conservative government have failed in almost every degree. I think the country is in managed decline. It feels a bit like the mid-1970s to me. I don't see any prospect of a Starmer government being any different. I think the quality of life for most people, most families, is getting a little bit worse every year in a number of ways. Yep. You can't get a GP appointment, travelling, the cost of living, the prospect of your kids ever getting a house, the population explosion that's been caused by a Westminster consensus that effectively supports legal immigration on levels we never even dreamt of. So for all of those reasons, I look at things and think, well, if I was to come back into the front line of politics, could I make a positive difference? Could I change things as I see it for the better? Against that, I enjoy working here at GB News. I've got options, perhaps more options after doing the jungle. So, one would be a very easy life. One would be back going into the sort of, helter-skelter world of politics.
You can't resist it, can you?
Well, I haven't decided. I genuinely
Let me find the Observer.
This
This is an interesting headline about you. Let's see. They're saying that you want to perhaps return to the fray. Farage will help reform make election about immigration. Former Brexit Party leader poised to return to politics, claim allies.
Well, that's just speculation.
Well, come on, nail your colours to the mast a little more. Maybe you want to tell me that you don't want to do it now, that you want to come back a bit later. Maybe you want to see what happens to the Conservative Party, what's left of it, and then reconsider.
Well, that's another option, is that you let the election go by, the inevitable happens, the Conservatives lose heavily, or perhaps they're even routed. I mean, it's not impossible that they go down to 120 seats, something like that. It could easily, it could happen. And there might be an argument that that's the right moment to get back involved. I genuinely, I'm not trying to get away from your questions. I genuinely haven't made my mind up. It is, on a political level, a big decision, but on a personal level too. It's an enormous decision.
But isn't reform gaining the momentum now? I mean...
Yes, it is. And reform is, the great thing about reform's growth is that it's solid, organic growth. It's steady. It's happening week by week, month by month. The polling that I've seen since I came out of the jungle, it's consistently now 10 to 11%. So, we're pushing up to where it was a decade ago.
But then that begs the question, if not now, then when? Because we've got this point of crisis for the Conservatives. I mean, Oliver Dowden on earlier, sort of insisting everything's fine, even though Rishi Sunak's approval rating has dropped to below Boris Johnson's. So it's almost like the perfect chemistry for you to come back.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, of course, if we had European-style elections, ironically, with proportional representation...
The only part of European politics that you were in favour of.
Well, actually, most of the world has a degree of representative democracy. It's just sort of us in America stuck with this very 19th century model. So if we had... Even if there was an element of PR in our elections, I think the answers I'd give you this morning would be a lot more positive. I'm still very bruised by 2015.
Yes.
You're getting 4 million votes in one seat.
Yes.
What the hell's the point of this?
Yes.
And maybe if you believe some of the private polling at the minute, maybe reform, if I was heavily involved, we'd get between 5 and 6 million votes and 3 seats. I have to ask myself, is it worth it?
Well, it's worth it if you want to give Conservatism a bloody nose and you're so concerned about the country going to hell in a handcart that something needs to be done. No, I know.
Basically, I don't see any difference now between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party in terms of their leaderships. These are two models of big state, high tax, open-door immigration, social democracy. And ironically, with David Cameron back, I mean, you wonder now with foreign policy whether we've even left the European Union.
Do you agree with the tactic of making Reform's entire campaign solely based on immigration?
I think, no, not solely. That would be wrong. I think there are 3 major issues out there at the moment. I think the population explosion and the impact on people's lives and the fact that it's not being discussed is huge. It's the biggest disconnect that exists between Westminster and the country. But equally, I think the cost of living is very real.
Yes.
I think the inflationary squeezes that people have felt are leaving a lot of people really quite scared out there at the moment. But I also think the NHS has been an absolutely central part of our lives for over 3/4 of a century. And, we know it's not perfect, can't be perfect, but we expect basic things, such as going to see a doctor.
Yes.
And when you read that 15 million people, 15 million appointments so far in this calendar year have taken more than a month.
Yeah.
More than a month to see a GP. So we've got some major crises out there. We clearly need radical reform. We need different thinking. So, no, I think they're the 3 key areas.
Let's talk about a couple of other things that you're obviously personally invested in. The Travis Smith report into Coutts has concluded that there was no evidence of discrimination in any of the exit cases, including no evidence of a customer's account being escalated for exit or ultimately being exited due to political views or party political affiliations or other protective characteristics. What do you make of that?
Total baloney.
Right. Whitewash.
You only had to read the subject access request on me, which clearly said I did not align with the values of the
So what's going on here?
Well, Travis Smith, of course, headed up. Their emeritus boss is somebody who described Brexiteers as xenophobes and racists. I mean, this is the big club, isn't it? It's Howard Davis's mates, called in to do a review. They did say that many of the procedures that were being followed were very subjective and not being done correctly. Overall, the report's not worth a row of beans.
All right. After this, I'm going to read it. Well, I'm going to read it now. In fact, Coutts' new chief executive, Mohammed Syed, said the bank, quotes, recognise the need to improve our customer account closure processes, and those improvements are already well underway. It is clear that there are lessons to be learnt. The experience of some of our customers fell short of what they should expect, and we apologise to them. Just in the interest of balance, I must read that. Let's talk about David Cameron. Did you find out that he was in post before you went to the jungle?
I think he was put into post 2 days before I went in. And even though I was sort of in a period of purdah, I did have Sky News Australia on, and I saw that Cameron had been appointed. I simply could not believe it. And true to form, here we are this morning with his first major foreign policy statement.
Yes.
And he doesn't do it from a British perspective, an independent foreign policy. He does it in conjunction with the Germans, which I thought was very interesting. It's as if the Brexit vote had never happened. But I also saw some of the wording in it.
Yeah, here it is. The Israeli government should do more to discriminate sufficiently between terrorists and civilians, ensuring its campaign is targeted on Hamas leaders and operatives. So are they saying that the Israelis are trying to kill civilians?
Well, the implication there is that civilians have been targeted. That is clumsy. It is offensive in the extreme to the Israelis, who are doing their best. And I do believe they're doing their absolute best to minimise civilian casualties. They can see that global opinion is a very, very delicate area for them. The reason I suggest to you that it's so badly worded is I guess the joint statement was written in German and then translated into English. And, with Cameron there, it's as if we're ignoring the Brexit result, we're ignoring the architect of it. And it just shows you how much trouble they're in. And it shows you also that the whole 2019 election, when they tried to become the Brexit party, they never really meant it.
No. And also you're concerned about him having any involvement at all in the governmental decision-making over the future of the Telegraph.
Well, I'm worried about this. And I mean, I know you've spent many, many years working for the Telegraph titles. I think it has quite a unique position. If you go back to the pandemic, when even some of the most conservative newspapers like The Sun and The Mail supported every measure, anyone that wasn't adhering was a cave idiot. It was really only the Telegraph during that period saying, should we really be locking down like this? Are we really getting this right? Are we happy that government's taken this amount of our liberty without any question? So the Telegraph does have, and yet, you know, people joke about it being the house magazine of the Conservative Party, but it does actually have a quite distinctive position. And if you ally that to the Spectator magazine, which is the longest running weekly political publication in the world, these are two very, very important titles in our media landscape. And the worry is that if you put it into hands of effectively autocratic dictators who have their own series of vested interests, that it won't be good for the independence of the newspaper. And in the middle of all of this, of course, is our friend Lord Cameron now, who has been a visiting professor at a UAE university, taking their money. And the point that I made yesterday in a piece that I wrote was that he should be nowhere near the government's decision-making process. So point one, Cameron shouldn't be there. And frankly, I mean, after the Greenshill scandal, how they could even consider him being back in government is quite beyond me. But more importantly, I think that the regulator, Ofcom, I think the Competition and Markets Authority, I think the British government themselves ought to be saying that in the interests of, you know, media plurality in this country, this is a very bad idea.
Nigel Farage, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Have a very Merry Christmas. And a Happy New Year. Thank you very much indeed. It should be pointed out that Redbird IMI, which is the group which the bid is on behalf of for the Telegraph, say that editorial impartiality will not be compromised and insist that journalistic accuracy will also be preserved, just to say in their defence. Well, lots more still to come on the show. I'm going to be speaking to two political titans, Michael Portillo and John Rentoul, about what 2024 may bring. So stay tuned for that. Don't go anywhere.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Well, if anything can be predicted about 2024, it's that it's going to be a political banger, because we're expecting an election maybe in May, maybe in autumn. But to discuss what might happen in the next 12 months, I'm joined by John Rentoul, who's the chief political commentator at The Independent, and Michael Portillo, former Defence Secretary, GB News presenter from 11 a.m. Lovely to see you both, chaps.
Thank you.
Let's start with what's gone before. So can I ask you both, first of all, John, for your kind of key political moment of 2023?
Well, I thought for the long term, the most significant thing that happened in 2023 was Rishi Sunak backing off net zero targets. Okay. I thought that was the moment when an awful lot of this green talk, which people love and everybody subscribes to it, everybody wants to save the planet, starts to hit reality. Because as that deadline for ripping out people's gas boilers approaches and getting rid of petrol cars, the political problems of that and the costs to people's pockets is becoming much clearer.
Yes, this was an example of Rishi Sunak actually being quite political, which doesn't often happen. Let's have a look at the clip.
Yes, net zero is going to be hard and will require us to change. But in a democracy, we must also be able to scrutinise and debate those changes, many of which are hidden in plain sight, in a realistic manner. This debate needs more clarity, not more emotion. The test should be, do we have the fairest credible path to reach net zero by 2050 in a way that...
There we are. I love his kind of bed at bedtime type, book at bedtime type tone. Michael, what's your key moment of 2023?
Let me say that I think John's moment was a very good one. Mine is more personal because it's kind of the moment that I finally gave up with Rishi Sunak. Because when he announced that he was going to ban smoking progressively, so we'd arrive at a situation where a 28-year-old can legally buy cigarettes and a 27-year-old cannot, I thought this was such an impractical idea. I thought he'd lost touch with reality. It had nothing to do with conservatism. I thought here was a man devoid of ideas and plunging into a policy which I think has been poorly thought through and not researched.
Although what's notable from both of your big moments of 2023 is neither of them involve Keir Starmer. I mean, John, has this bloke got what it takes? Because he might win the election by default, but not necessarily in a kind of Blairite, everyone wants Keir to be PM.
Well, he's not Tony Blair, much to my regret. But you can't argue with results. I mean, he has taken advantage of Tory weakness with a ruthlessness which we didn't suspect was there. And you've got to give him credit for that.
Although he doesn't always perform brilliantly at PMQs.
He performs very poorly. I mean, he had one good PMQs this year, I think, where he really knocked Rishi Sunak about. I mean, Rishi Sunak was on poor form, but he is also defending a very difficult situation.
Yes.
But, you know, I do think, I mean, people... I've got a lot of criticisms of Keir Starmer. I don't like his basic political instincts, but you can't argue with the results. He has positioned himself extremely well.
Yes, he's the next Thatcher, apparently, John.
Well, and the next Tony Blair as well.
I think he's managed the Labour Party quite impressively. I mean, obviously, the war in Gaza has presented a big issue for the Labour Party, because most of them are instinctively pro-Palestinian, and Keir has held the line of being quite pro-Israeli and specifically not against a ceasefire of the sort that the Israelis don't want. He's held that line. I've been quite impressed by that. And I think in the last couple of weeks, the rumblings have rather died down as we get deeper into this crisis, or further into this crisis in time, at least.
Can I ask you both for your predictions for next year? I know it's always tricky, but I was speaking to Mark Francois earlier, I was speaking to Nigel Farage. What effect might he have on things? Oliver Dowden there painting a positive picture, even though Rishi Sunak's approval rating is down in the gutter. It's -49. Michael, what do you think will actually happen? First of all, when do you think the election will be?
October.
OK, and what do you think the result might be?
I think it will be a Labour landslide, and my reasons... I mean, firstly, that's what the opinion polls tell us, and I've sort of given up being able to see why the opinion polls should change. Nothing seems to be bouncing back for the government in the way that you might normally expect. But things that have gone additionally wrong for the Conservatives are, I think, that the Reform Party is looking quite strong. I think Robert Jenrick's resignation was quite an important moment because he was kind of telling Tories, look, the government could do more about the boats, but it's choosing not to because it's more committed to international law than it is to dealing with the boats issue. I think that is, you know, such a gift to the Reform Party. And, of course, the other thing is that the SNP is in a state of collapse. That, too, favours a strong Labour majority.
So do you think kind of electoral wipeout? Do you think worse than 97, or...?
I mean, that is such a guess, isn't it? I mean, if Reform perform well, you know, we're going to see Tories losing seats where we might not have predicted it. So what was 97? It was about 160 for the Conservatives. I think that's perfectly plausible.
And John, first of all, your prediction for when the election will be?
October the 24th.
Oh,
possibly.
Very specific. OK.
Or, well, except I'm not sure. I've written about this for The Independent.
Fair enough, OK. We'll hold you to that.
I mean, I think it could be December because, I mean, October would mean wiping out the party conferences.
Yes,
and the parties actually earn quite a lot of money from those. Yeah,
OK. And your prediction for the result, John?
Well, I think it's going to be a small Labour majority.
Really?
I don't buy into the landslide territory. I think once it becomes a choice between prime ministers, you know, you've got a choice between Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak, I think the gap will narrow.
OK. All right, so not total evisceration. And then final question for you both. Who do you think, if it is an electoral calamity, Rishi Sunak leaves immediately, right? Do you both agree on that, chaps?
Yeah.
Who do you think will be the next leader of the Conservatives?
Do you mind if I tell a quick anecdote?
Very quickly, because we're running out of time, as ever is the case.
On the Monday of the election week, 1997, the headline in the Times was Heseltine and Portillo to battle out Conservative leadership. By the end of the week, I had lost my seat, and he had had a heart attack.
He had a heart attack,
right.
Absolutely.
With that in mind, I think Robert Jenrick has come up very, very well. I think if Suella Braverman's name got to the party in the country, she would win.
But
the question is,
Michael, it won't.
All right. Very quickly, John, give me a name.
Kemi Badenoch.
Kemi Badenoch is your bet.
I just can't see how she...
I think that's a very...
I mean, Michael's right. You can't predict these things, but at the moment, I think Kemi's in the strongest position.
I think she's a very good bet. I agree with that.
Michael, John, lovely to have agreement at the end of the show. Thank you very, very much indeed for your support this year. The show's gone great guns. We're doing brilliantly in the ratings, and we look forward to doing more in 2024 when I'll see you again. In the meantime, have a very Merry Christmas, and Portillo's up next.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vaughtry, here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It is going to be quite a blustery, windy day for the vast majority of us. Some very tightly spaced isobars across much of the UK, providing gale-strength winds in places. It's also going to be a very wet day for western areas of Scotland, with this trailing weather system that is essentially stalled across this region and will provide heavy and persistent rainfall to the Highlands, Isle of Skye, Argyll and Bute. Do take care, an amber weather warning is in force. Significant disruption is possible from flooding and even landslides. Elsewhere, it will be a drier day. The cloud wants to break its way up into the afternoon, particularly to the northeast of higher ground, so the best of sunnier breaks through central eastern England, parts of northeast Scotland as well, where we'll see temperatures climb to highs of 13 degrees Celsius. The rain will eventually ease its way off for western Scotland as we head into the overnight period, but it's going to push its way southwards as a result, spreading across Northern Ireland, northwest England, into the far north of Wales as well. The far southeast holding on to to a drier night, still a mild one here, lows of 9 degrees Celsius, but some drier and clearer spells pushing their way into northwest Scotland as we start off Monday, so generally a better day here. Elsewhere though, Monday looks to be rather drab, dreary and damp with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Quite murky in places, hill fog across Eryri, the Pennines, the Cheviot. Still blustery across areas of England and Wales, but the wind's easing out for Northern Ireland, central areas of Scotland. Further rain is on the cards as we head towards Tuesday and Wednesday as well, so keep up to date with the forecast. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akua, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.